Stephen Stone. I'm with UNEP. On behalf of the 4 co-organizing countries of this event tonight, leveraging effective and inclusive collaboration with financial institutions to accelerate the transition to more circular economies, which I would say shorthand, making the money flow, because we want to keep it simple tonight. It's at the end of a long day. I'm sure many of you have been in meetings all day, and some of you have traveled from very far, and we really appreciate your presence tonight, and especially the UNEA6 president, who has been working tirelessly over many days. I just want to say a few words about the event tonight and the co-organizers. We have 4 co-hosts for this event, and they're here in the front row. The government of Peru, the government of Rwanda, the government of Morocco, and the government of Costa Rica, who is not here yet because of the rain. Actually, Ambassador Giovanna Valverde is dealing with the rain fallout at her. She'll be here shortly, we hope, for the event tonight. So it really is, colleagues, about making the money flow for a circular economy. We've all heard about a circular economy. We know this is the way nature works, but we know it's the way our economies don't quite work yet, especially our industrial economies. It's still an aspiration, it's still an ambition. And part of that aspiration and that ambition is making the money flow, making the investments happen. And so in addition to having representation from our 4 co-hosts at the ministerial level, we also have financial entities here today who are joining us from the African Development Bank, from the World Bank, from UNEP Finance Initiative, and I'm forgetting one, the European Bank. Thank you. My apologies. So I just want to say 1 or 2 things before handing it over to our UNEA6 president for opening remarks. The first is that we need circular solutions for a planet under pressure. That should be obvious to all of us with what's happening in the world today. The Global Resource Outlook will be launched this week. It says we use 100 billion tons of raw materials every year. And you know what? Almost a third to a half just goes into the air. It's emissions, it's effluents, it's solid waste. Almost a half of what we consume becomes emissions or waste. It's not at all circular. So we need circularity, but then how do we actually do that? How do we finance it? And that's what we will hear today from our ministers and from our financing entities. How do we make the money flow? So that's the agenda for tonight, colleagues. We have 1 hour and 15 minutes, or until the reception calls us, because I understand there's a gala dinner. And with that, I'd like to invite Madame Leila Banali to the front stage, Madame Rosa Zavala, Vice Minister from Peru, to the front stage, who will provide opening remarks for this session. Please. Welcome, welcome. It really is about setting the stage, Minister. How do you see the importance of this event in the context of UNEA6 and also for your country, the issue of circular economies? So if you could help us set the stage for tonight.
Thank you, esteemed ministers and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to speak before electricity comes down, because I've been having discussions today where we had some electricity cuts because of the rain. We are convening today for this pivotal event, and I'm very happy to have it done under the auspices of the UN Environment Assembly. And we embark today on this journey of great significance. Very grateful to my fellow ministers and colleagues from different countries. And the importance of this event is because we are facing unprecedented global challenges. I don't think we have the luxury of time anymore, and we don't have the luxury of enabling losses as we used to do. I'm not going to give you the list of all the challenges and issues and crises that we have faced over the last few years. In the opening of UNEA 6, I talked about 3 pivotal points. So after COVID, after the financial crisis, after a few of the challenges, the triple planetary crisis that we are facing, we also have in 2024 a very interesting moment. These 3 pivotal points that I call, I mean, first we have, when we gathered 2 years ago in the same buildings, we had the beginning of a terrible war in Europe. When we still, all of us, we are still actually being affected by the implications, the geopolitical implications, the economic implications, and also the social and inflationary implications of this war. And we also have another war also that's starting that actually was started a few months ago in the Middle East as well, that is having major geopolitical implications. Second inflection point was the fact that in 2024, we are gathering here in UNEA 6, and 50% of the world population is electing its leaders. So there might be some policies that might be reversed, some policies that might be changed, some policies that might be accelerated when it comes to the issues of sustainable development, environment, but also circularity and circular economy. And the third inflection point is something that is very close to my heart as President of the United Nations Assembly for the Environment, is the need to restore trust in multilateralism. There are a few things that we need to work on to ensure that we work in synergies together. And when it comes to financing, circular economy is definitely an important aspect that in 2024, we need to restore trusts in collaboration, in synergies, etc. There are a few things, a couple of points that I want to leave with you here today. Well, the first one is the critical role of financial institutions. You mentioned a few numbers. This transition to circular economies can create, of course, significant business opportunities. There are some studies that talk about $4.5 trillion in annual economic output by 2030. But that's in theory. But in reality, we're still, even if the circular economy is increasingly recognized as an area of value creation for the financial sector, we're still not seeing policies being following, because you need actually, well, trust, and you need sequencing and sustainability in the financing of those circular economy projects. The other point that I wanted to mention is also the strategies of financial institutions themselves. We are seeing strengthening of ESG frameworks, setting resource efficiency targets, redirecting lending and investments towards sustainable technologies and business model, but also sustainable strategies and policies. And that's why government support and the regulatory framework are very important. And that's why I mentioned the fact that 50% of the world population is electing its leaders, because we need to have the critical role that governments play as an enabling policy and regulatory framework, but also stable policy and regulatory frameworks over time to encourage financial institutions to integrate circularity in their products and services. I will not bore you with the barriers to finance circular economy. I'm sure you will discuss that in this session. Taxonomies. I'll just finish with the adoption of credible and sustainable finance taxonomies that can help define and standardize what constitutes really an environmentally sustainable investments, including, of course, those that contribute to the circular economy. We need to, of course, increase transparency. I will not use the word greenwashing here, promise, but we need to definitely encourage investments in activities that significantly and impactfully contribute to circular economy goals. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we gather in this vibrant and rainy city of Nairobi today, I really want this to be a catalyst for change. Let's hopefully embark in this journey with renewed vigor, even if in some of our countries there are elections happening that might distract us from continuing our work on ensuring the channeling of funding and investments into circular economy goals. But I think our actions today in 2024, under the auspices of the UN, within the relieving arms of UNEA 6, will impact the current generations that have, for several of them, for several populations, problems to finish the month, because we still have a cost of living crisis in many countries of the world, and also of course, for generations to come. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Minister Benali, for opening, for setting the frame, the taxonomies, the enabling policy environment. And I was a little remiss in introducing our panelists. We have a really wonderful set of panelists for the conversation tonight. I know, Minister, you will probably need to attend your other commitments. We have a very nice lineup. And I was also remiss because there's 4 additional partners that I need to mention who have been helping to organize this event before I hand it to you, Rosa, which is the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, GACERE. Some of you might have heard of it. The other is the Latin American and Circular Economy Coalition, which I believe you would know very well. The Africa Circular Economy Alliance, which I believe is here represented today. The UN ECE Circular Stakeholder Engagement Platform, Circular Step. The World Bank and UNFI, among others. So a lot of partners coming together tonight to heed your call, Minister, to come together and work on this very important issue. Thank you for those remarks. With this, I hand over to the Vice Minister from Peru for some additional welcoming remarks from our co-hosts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Ms. Leila Benali, President of the United Nations Environment Assembly and Minister of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development of Morocco, distinguished representative of the member state co-organizers of this event, distinguished representative of the regional multi-stakeholder platforms and organizations to accelerate the circular transition, and distinguished participant, I extend my warmest greetings to all. I'm honored to be present at this global event to discuss how joint, collaborative, and inclusive actions with financial institutions can accelerate a just transition to the circular economy at international, regional, national, and local levels. Especially considering that access to finance is one of the main enabling conditions for the transition to a circular economy of many of the current production and consumption models. Peru has recognized the transition to a circular economy as one of its main strategies to advance in a cross-cutting manner in the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, to achieve more sustainable consumption and production. In this sense, as members of GACERE and as president of the steering committee of the Regional Coalition of Circular Economy of Latin America and the Caribbean, we are convinced of the importance of generating this type of spaces to promote dialogue around this issue, particularly today regarding collaboration opportunities for financing. In this sense, I welcome each of you to this important event, being sure that this discussion will be extremely relevant for the systemic transition of our countries to a circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vice Minister. So with that, we are open. We are essentially open for business on this issue of how do we make the money flow. I want to thank very much again UNEA 6 President, Minister Leila Benali, for her opening remarks. Minister Zabala, I encourage you to stay on the stage, if you would, for our next session. And thank you so much, Minister. Thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause, please. So as we move into the second part, may I invite to the stage, please, Her Excellency Claudine Uweda. She is the Minister of State for Environment, Rwanda. Please. Yeah. Mr. Uros Weigel, he is the State Secretary from the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Energy in the Republic of Slovenia. Welcome, Minister Weigel. When Ambassador Valverde shows up, if she shows up, she will join the distinguished panelists. But for now, there is a silver lining to this, which is you get more time. That is the silver lining. In this second part, we've heard a little bit from the opening remarks about setting the scene. What are we doing here at UNEA, the stakes for future generations, the importance of this topic. We want to go a little deeper now. What is the national experience that you have had with circular economy? The roadmaps, the financing, the generating coalitions together to come together around this topic. What has worked? What has been difficult? We want to go a little bit deeper in terms of your experience. And the interesting thing here is we have representatives from the financial community who are listening. They are listening, and of course, we're live streaming as well. So this is a great chance for an honest conversation. It really is about having an honest conversation about finding solutions for circularity, which is not a trivial exercise. Programming circularity, designing circularity, financing circularity is not a trivial exercise. So let's kick it off with a question to you, Your Excellency Claudine Uweda. We know Rwanda's exercised leaderships on so many fronts. We were talking today about the Kigali Amendment, plastics, circular economy. Can you tell us a bit more about the national roadmap for circularity, your experience? What has worked well for you? What has been your challenge?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And, I can say that it's a profound honor just to represent the government of Rwanda to this high-level panel that will be discussing the circular economy. The question you're asking is just to know what was successful to Rwanda when it comes to circular economy and what kind of challenges. First of all, I would like to highlight that Rwanda is deeply committed to accelerating the transition to circular economy, and we are actively integrating the circular economy into our national strategies, plans, just to make sure that we create a well-balanced economic growth that respects at the same time the environment. So circular economy is a priority for Rwanda. We are trying to just to make it a success in all components, and it's really well integrated in everything. And the most important thing for Rwanda is we have established a framework, and we have this first ever national circular economy action plan. And this action plan gives us a kind of directive and direction for transition to circular economy. So then the first point you highlighted in the beginning, just to make money flows towards circular economy. Yes, this is true. For the case of Rwanda, mobilizing the finance, public finance that support implementation of circular economy is really crucial if we want to make it happen. And the financing mechanism include both, the funding from the budget, the national treasury. We start by ourselves just to fund our priorities. And again, we have established the Rwanda Green Fund, you might know that. And under the Green Fund, we have a window that's about a strategic initiative to address the local market gaps in the financial of green and climate resilience projects. It's under the Green Fund. And the DC is really facilitating the private operators just to access the green financing at low costs, because it's in close collaboration with the Rwanda, the bank, the Rwandan Development Bank. And I think when it comes to financial institution, this development bank is on the forefront. And again, of course, we cannot ignore external financing, which is a bilateral and multilateral grants that some of those funding are injected into the circular economy. And we've been implementing a number of projects related to the circular economy. So I can say, just to summarize, that the government of Rwanda is really highly committed just to transition to circular economy, and this is also linked to what we discussed this afternoon on the nature-based solution. So by implementing our green growth and climate resilience strategy, we have the environmental policy that contains this circular economy. So having this action plan is a tool that gives us a roadmap on the way to move fast and sustainably. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Minister. Well, it's interesting that you talked about the Green Fund. You talked about some of the mechanisms that are in play. And before she joined, she was telling me that she's actually coming from Ministry of Finance and Planning. So someone who knows environment, but who also knows finance and planning, which I assume will be a key asset for actually making it work. Thank you so much. So now we turn to you, Excellency Rosa Zavala. You have traveled very far today, but we are very grateful that you're taking the stage with us and that Peru has shown so much leadership on circular economy and the coalition in Latin America. So my question to you is, Peru's national circular economy roadmap is still being developed, but what kind of longer term financing plans are you envisaging to get this roadmap off the ground?
Thank you, Steve, for your question. In this regard, the first specific objective of the roadmap related to governance and policies propose to strengthen the development of a political, institutionally, and regulatory framework to promote investment and financing for the transition towards a circular economy. Within this framework, the roadmap proposes actions to develop innovative systems and mechanisms to facilitate access to financing and promote sustainable investment as a key point for the generation of circular business models in the private sector. On the other hand, the draft roadmap also considers actions to make the Peruvian fiscal system greener and promote the carbonization and cleaner and more sustainable production and consumption. Additionally, the proposed national roadmap for circular economy includes a specific section with basic criteria so that in a later stage, a financing and resource mobilization strategy can be developed for the implementation of the roadmap itself. Some financing mechanisms have been identified for the development of the roadmap lines of action that are debt for nature swap mechanisms, the use of global funds for sustainable development, and the optimization of the use of the public treasury budget and the use of the special regional and municipal development funds. On the other hand, we consider the potential use of the 7 existing sectoral and thematic funds in Peru related to natural protected areas, infrastructure, energy, social inclusion funds, innovation, research, business, and technological development funds. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Minister Zavala. So it's very interesting. It sounds like Peru has a whole suite of tools and instruments that are at your disposal, from fiscal policy to sectoral funds that you might have in place. So very, very impressive. I'm going to come back to you a little bit on how we go deeper onto understanding what those are. But right now, I'd like to turn to the minister from Slovenia, Mr. Weigel. Am I getting it right? It's not bad. Thank you for training me. Mr. Uroš Weigel is the state secretary from Slovenia, and your government is also one that has been very active in circular economy. How is the government using public finance and public policies to leverage on private finance in particular?
Thank you very much. And I have to also say it's an honor to participate here as, along with the distinguished speakers. For Slovenia, it's being a member of the EU, there's 2 levels for us that are of particular importance, both the EU level and the national level, because at the EU level, we have so many common policies, we have a common internal market, and many of the things that we do, we must do together. I'm glad to say that circular economy is one of the 6 priorities of the European Environmental Action Programme. It's been followed up by many initiatives, probably the most outspoken of which is the 2015 EU Action Plan for the Circular Economy. I think in a way, on a national level, we went one step further, that we've integrated the circular economy as an integral element to implement our Slovenian development strategy. So the development strategy as such is circled around the SDGs, and it has indicators and targets that are measuring the success in reaching circularity as a means to reach many of these goals. We also have a roadmap, a national roadmap towards a circular economy, which is based on a sort of circular triangle of inseparable elements. On one side, the circular economy as a business model. On the second side, a circular change, as in change of government policies. And third, the promotion of a circular culture. So promoting it among the citizens, the public, the civil society. And I think all of these elements have to come together in order to make things work. And one element that needs to be in place is adequate financing, and achieving private financing is a very important challenge in this regard. Private finance can be mobilized by using blending instruments, so by blending public and private finance, but it can also be harvested through national tax policy, through regulation, through different kinds of measures that we can put in place to encourage private investment. I would give 7 examples of this that we aim to promote at home and with various levels of success. But on one side, it's subsidies or grants, so offering subsidies to businesses, especially SMEs, to invest in circular economy activities, from low-hanging fruit of resource efficiency to more integral complex solutions. This is needed to offset the initial costs of transitioning towards circular business models. The second incentive that we have is a tax incentive. We also have tax allowances that allow companies to invest in green technologies. A third aspect, very important one, is public procurement. Public procurement represents 12 to 18% of the GDP of economies, and implementing green public procurement is an important aspect. Slovenia was one of the first countries that actually that adopted regulation on green public procurement, and we're doing efforts to both enforce this, but as well to raise awareness of the importance of life cycle analysis, of benefits of such green procurement. With the amount of investment that is going, and a lot of this is going into the built environment, which is of particular resource demand, we really, this offers us the opportunity to set the standard of what we want and what kind of efficiency we're looking for in investments. Another area is the regulatory framework. Slovenia, as part of the EU, has much of this regulatory framework at the EU level. Its regulations and standards promoting sustainability and circularity, for instance, recycling targets, landfill taxes, mandating extended producer responsibility schemes, and other regulatory efforts that we can make. Another aspect is research and development funding. Although basic research is where public financing is needed most, it's also the foundation of other research, but we need to make sure that we harvest enough investment into research and development on circular economy technologies and practices. This will help to drive down the costs and improve the effectiveness of the solutions that are found. And the two remaining instruments, one would be financial instruments. So we're also trying to develop green bonds, revolving funds, means to channel private capital into sustainable and circular practices. This is mostly done through the Slovenian Development Bank. And the last one, I touched upon that before, but very important is capacity building and awareness programs. We need to educate businesses, we need to educate the public about the benefits of sustainable and circular economy. And by fostering a culture of sustainability, we can create a conducive environment for private investment in such matters.
Thank you very much, State Secretary Weigel. So it sounds like you have a lot of things going on in Slovenia. And you talked about the triangle inside of circularity of government, business, and civil society, essentially, to make it happen. So very, very interesting, that experience, because I have the feeling there's a lot we can learn from that experience. I want to move from here back to you, Claudine. Rwanda, the case, you had spoke about some of the financing instruments as well, the Green Fund, some of the fiscal policies, the planning instruments. When it comes to gaps that you might perceive, what are they? How large are they? How do you intend to go around filling them? How do you mobilize the resources to make the money flow for that transition?
Yeah, thank you very much. I can say that the starting point is the way we mobilize those resources. In the previous panel, I highlighted the growing the growing climate finance is a really growing stream investment in Rwanda. So climate finance is part of this circular economy. So the way we mobilize the resources just toward the transitioning to the circular economy, the starting point is I highlighted that those kind of regulatory framework that we have established. Here we can, for example, highlight the law banning the single use of plastic and the other laws. And this collaboration strengthening between financial institutions, the green funds, and the public institutions is another tool that helps us mobilizing those sustainable financing in a sustainable manner as well. So you highlight the gap that we are seeing now towards transition to this circular economy. The first one is the adoption. The adoption that's based on the quick appetite by the business operators to see, them investing in the green, moving toward the green investment and toward the circular economy. But for the case of Rwanda, we put this number of instruments related to, for example, creating incentives, tax incentive to attract business operators that just to join this investment under the circular economy. So we have, for example, created this e-waste collection facility. This is managed by the government of Rwanda, but this is created by the government, but the private sector enter into through the management of this e-waste collection facility. So we have a number of projects where we just incentivize. I've highlighted this window under the Green Fund, which is this initiative that was created just to attract and scale up the green investment when it comes to private investment as well. So we are trying to elaborate and just to try different tools and to see how we can mobilize more, but in a well-coordinated manner. So another gap I can say is, as someone from the Ministry of Finance, I was in charge of planning. What we do under the circular economy, it's like we are trying to develop sustainable economic models, and we need just to respond to the sustainability question. So when we have various needs, though we go through prioritizations, I know we can prioritize through this planning process and define the short-term, medium-term, and long-term interventions. But most of the time, you see those things like crisis created by the pandemic, the COVID-19, we have the climate change that come and they disrupt all, any plan, done before. But we're trying to cope with all kind of threat that comes to disrupt the original plan. by making sure that we can try to ignore the kind of benefit we can get from investing in something today that is not really climate resilient, and make sure that our budget integrate what we call climate budget. We do what we call climate budget tagging, and make sure that environment, climate change, the circular economy is well integrated into the planning and budgeting process. So, and another key element that we're pushing, and thanks to the support provided by the World Bank, just to make sure that just we come up with a model that help us just to measure environment and natural resources, and just to discount the environmental cost associated with any development, and just to come up with what we can call the green GDP. So this is another thing we think will really be helping us just to move forward toward this sustainable economy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Claudine. So it's really interesting. You're at the forefront, green GDP, climate tagging, all of these different instruments to put Rwanda out in front in terms of looking at nature and valuing nature as part of your move to the circular economy. It's fascinating. You noticed I moved over here. It's so hot in this room. I don't know if it's just me but we could probably open the windows or turn on the fan if anyone else is getting too hot. Just let me know if it's. So you also spoke about things that happen that are not foreseen. You mentioned the pandemic and other things. And I want to come to that question of resilience. I'm going a little bit off the script here, but just in terms of the Slovenia experience, I'm going to come back to you. Does circularity build resilience, or is it another factor that makes things difficult for you? And particularly around the financing, because we're talking about a transition here. Minister Vogel.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it's a very good question. I have to say, first of all, circularity is not an option. I think in the way that where we stand and where we're heading, it's a must. So it's difficult to see whether it's. I mean, it's difficult to have a discussion on options. But on the other hand, it certainly does build resilience. I've just. I rejoined the Ministry of Environment about a year and a half ago, after a couple of years on doing other topics, and coming back to this. What is interesting is that some things have changed. Challenges remain the same. A lot of the solutions remain the same. Maybe we didn't micro define the solutions then, but we knew general terms where they would be. But what changed in between was that, at least in Slovenian circumstances, is that we used to say that circularity, climate friendliness, that is something that you need to do because of the environment. But on the other hand, all of this is actually building resilience. Circularity means building local resilience. It's better, less dependence on volatile energy prices, on volatile supply prices. It's also it builds a more resilient economy and society to outside shocks. And unfortunately, we're likely to be experiencing these. So in that regard, I would say yes, circularity does build resilience. It's demanding. It means change. Change is always demanding. We are speaking about investment. It needs investment, so it's not easy. But on the other hand, I think it's.
So that's very interesting. So it's an affirmative yes. It really isn't an option. It's more like how we move in this direction.
Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, what were you doing before you came back to the ministry?
I'm a career diplomat. I was in the years 2020, 2022. I was dealing on the EU level on COVID.
So some things hit us from the side, and we're just not looking at them. So I will look to you, Rosa, but a little bit in the same vein. So things that happen from the side, we're not expecting them, but you're building towards a pathway for the future in Peru, and you've spoken about the roadmap around circularity. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the alliance, see if I'm getting this right, the Coalition for Circular Economy in Latin America, because I know that a lot of ministers have come together. What kind of role did this play for you in Peru? The Alliance for Circular Economy in Latin America. Coalition.
We are working effectively in our roadmap, but also one instrument that Minister of Environmental has been promoting is the Green Finance Taxonomy, which will be a voluntary instrument that will allow the identification and differentiation between a green project, and a traditional one. This instrument seeks to mobilize international funds through a national document. The idea of having a green finance taxonomy for Peru responds precisely to the possibility of having an orderly, transparent, coherent, and comparable investment classification system that allows stakeholders predictability on what can be considered a green investment or not. It will also allow the country to align itself with international standards in terms of sustainability and finance, which will facilitate the integration of the Peruvian economy into global financial markets and promote the attraction of foreign investment.
Thank you so much for that. You've gone deeper on the tools that Peru is using to mobilize resources and leverage resources, some very specific tools. And as we sort of bring this part of the panel to a close, I'd just like your reflections on the institutional part of circular economy. So working together, you mentioned the triangle, business, civil society, government, but then there's also this regional dimension that I wanted to tease out here, because in Africa, you have an alliance for circular economy. In Latin America, you have a coalition, I believe. I hope I'm not getting them mixed up. That's entirely possible. And then there's a global, right? A global alliance on circular economy and GACERE.
GACERE,
So
yes.
just to get a sense from you, how important is this? How does it work in your experience? Do you come to UNEA once every 2 years and talk about it with your colleagues? Or is this actually something that is living and breathing for you?
From our perspective, we believe that some of the issues that could be promoted as GACERE are many, and its members want to promote the development of a homogenized circular economy financing taxonomy, like I say, that would allow the different actors in the financial system to identify which activities qualify as circular economy investment, facilitate the exchange of experience that also are important for us, to make visible and disseminate the benefits for circular actions and initiatives that access financing, and generate specialist knowledge on circular finance as well as capacity building.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rosa, for speaking to that issue. So exchange of experience, learning, sharing lessons learned between peers who are struggling with common problems, but in very specific contexts. I would imagine the context of Peru is vastly different than the context of Rwanda or Slovenia, as I hear you describe them. So I'm going to come to you, Claudine, just in terms of cooperation, the institutions around, how much does that respond to your needs as a policymaker in Rwanda?
Yeah, starting by those alliances you highlight, for Rwanda, we believe that this is a kind of perfect ground just to catalyze the standards, which are really key in promoting this circular economy. Those regional alliances, such as African Circular Economy Alliance, those are forum that really, we believe, it can lead to significant conversation, experience sharing, and the opportunity even just to tackle, those resources needed to transition to circular economy. But of course, coming back home, we believe that public-private partnership is really crucial to transition to circular economy. Thank you. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. So it's helpful, but not necessarily sufficient. kind of like in math, right? Necessary but not sufficient. Still remember that. Okay, so thank you so much, Claudine. So, Minister Vogel, we're going to end with you. Just a reflection on the institutionality, GACERE, Europe, circular economy. Where do you turn for sharing experiences? What works for you from Slovenia perspective?
Well, for us, this experience on a national level and then sharing of experience of other nations is important, as well as this cooperation at a continental, at an EU level. I have to say, for Slovenia, now speaking of finance, the EU financing is a very important role on development activities in Slovenia, and it has been all the more in recent years because although the EU had a Green Deal before, it was after the pandemic with the desire to build back better. We pulled resources together and made a historic, I would say, decision to put additional funding into recovery and resilience, and the recovery and resilience fund throughout that would put investment in green and digital transition throughout Europe. And there is some elements of how this has been done, which are very good examples of how we should be doing things. I mentioned 3 points for this recovery and resilience funding throughout Europe. All funding, all investment needs to fulfill the do no significant harm principle. So we have to make sure that with one hand, we're not destroying what the other hand is trying to be doing. On the second part, 37% of the funding had to be earmarked for green transition, for environmental. Here, the new EU taxonomy played an important part in saying what is good and what is not. And thirdly, all investments in anything that remains in place for longer than 5 years, so buildings and anything that remains in space for longer, needs to be to undergo additional climate proofing and additional climate resilience. And for instance, for us, these are measures that we co-decided on the EU level and are now transposing this onto the national level. So all 3 of these elements are included in the proposal for a climate act, because we will, for the first time, hopefully this year, have a climate act. So for us, really working together at an EU level, developing solutions, and then bringing these back home has been, I believe, a success, and I hope the results will show this all the more.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I used to live in Central America, which is a collection of many smaller countries. And, you know, it was very interesting because there was the community of Central American states. And a lot of times they would look to the European community as a model for how that they could actually come together, because it's not easy, is it? Finding common ground and working together. And yet somehow regionally, you can be so much stronger. Anyway, ministers, thank you so much. We're going to close this part of the panel. We've heard from the ministers on experiences, on financing instruments, on financing gaps, on challenges, and then also some bright sides as well. What's been working for you in terms of moving the ball along towards this destination, this future that you see for your countries. Now you're going to have a chance to sit back and relax a little bit in the cool and hear from some of our financing experts who are here from the different banks. Let's give them a big round of applause. So I'd like to invite to the stage our next very short panel. Now you get the hot seat. So Valerie Hickey from the World Bank. She is the Global Director for Environment, Natural Resources, Blue Economy. Valerie, so good to have you here in Nairobi. Davina Milonge. She is the Principal Program Coordinator for African Development Bank. Milenji. You see, it's like international night. Davina, so glad you can be with us, and you have your state secretary here listening, so I know you're going to pay attention. And we have Nicola Pochettino. Nicola, welcome. He's the Director for Environment and Natural Resources at European Investment Bank. which, by the way, is one of the very large banks. I used to work at Inter-American Development Bank, and then I saw the size of your portfolio. It's massive, massive. He'll tell you about it. And Liesel Van As, not last but least, Liesel is with the UNEP Finance Initiative. So it's one of UNEP's homegrown associations of banks, insurance, and real estate. They do the net zero alliances that you probably have heard about, and she'll tell you more about that. Welcome. So we've just had a really interesting conversation here. You've heard a lot of country experiences ranging from Slovenia to Rwanda to Peru. They're struggling to find solutions to make the money flow. You represent pools of assets that is not free money. Let's face it, there's no free money in the world, but there are pools of capital to be deployed for the circularity transition. So I'd like to kick it off, perhaps with you, Valerie, if you'd like to kick it off for us. The specific challenges and lessons learned for making the money flow on a topic as pioneering as circular economy. It's not necessarily the traditional bricks and mortar. So where have you found the footholds for the bank, and what do you need to make it work?
No, thank you so much, Steve. And the minister from Slovenia said it right, that this is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And that's true of the financial sector, because in fact, the circular economy is about bricks and mortar. Because at the end of the day, that 100 billion tons of resources that we dig up, 90% of which we throw away every year, is not going to last. There simply aren't enough non-renewable resources to keep doing that every year. And what does exist is getting harder to find, and so more expensive, less cost effective. And when the price of money is getting more expensive every day, it just doesn't make sense to keep doing it the way we're doing it. But the question is, why are we doing what we're doing? Why is it that even though the linear economy isn't working, including for the financial sector, the story of recycling says it all. We used to recycle 9%, just 9%, but at least 9% before COVID globally. Today, it's barely over 7%. So we're actually going in the opposite direction. So why? Why is it that when it comes to the flow of money, the linear economy is working and the circular economy is not? Well, the linear economy is not an act of God. It's an act of government decree. It's about regulations. We have regulated our way into the linear economy, and that's exciting because it means we can regulate our way out of it and into a circular economy. And that's what, coming from the financial sector, we talk a lot about how do we green the financial sector? How do we make the financial sector make the money flow for the circular economy? And we think there's three key pieces. One is regulation. We've heard about it, and we need to push back when people make the argument that environmental regulation actually increases the cost of doing business. It doesn't. It increases innovation. We have examples from the European Union. We have examples from China. We have examples from Rwanda. But it's not just about regulation. At the end of the day, rules and regulation are no good without the institutions to enforce them and the private institutions who can innovate against them. And that's extremely important. And building institutional strength matters. And especially and importantly, we can't forget the micro and small businesses in this space. I think too often when we talk about institutional strengthening, we think about the public sector side, it matters. And when we talk about the private sector side, we talk about international, multinational companies. But in fact, when it comes to the circular economy, 90% of jobs and 90% of the contribution to GDP comes from micro and small businesses, for whom the cost of doing business and their returns are marginal. And they're most dependent on things like single-use plastic. So we need to make sure to take their needs into account. And then finally, if you get the rules right, if you get the institutions stronger, we also need public infrastructure. And not just the kind of downstream public infrastructure on recycling and solid waste management that we talk about, but the upstream on R&D and public research and development to make sure that we can help private sector innovate. But that's about greening the financial sector. But at the end of the day, you need to spend money to make money. So where is the money for innovations in these three spaces coming from? We think it's going to have to come ultimately from domestic public budgets and from the private sector. And from the World Bank side, we think there's two entry points that are key that we want to do more and more in to unlock money from domestic public budgets and from the private sector. The first is subsidies. At the end of the day, we live in a world where governments spend $1.25 trillion every year on subsidies. That's money available to them to make choices, to pick winners, to favor a linear economy. So that's money that can be made available, still spent still spent often through the same people, through the same businesses, through the same sectors, but spent for different purposes to push a circular economy. And that's critical. And it's not just critical in terms of making sure there's money available for the public sector to invest in the circular economy. It's critical for the private sector. At the end of the day, the private sector is business model agnostic. Whether it's linear, whether it's circular, they don't care as long as they maximize their returns. The reason it's cheaper right now to use virgin plastic, $72 a metric ton cheaper to use virgin plastic than recycled plastic, is because of subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies. So if we want circular business models to be cost and price competitive, we have to focus on subsidy reform. So that's one of the areas where we're really pushing. We think there's a huge opportunity to unlock money in the public sector and to make the private sector have more circular business models. The second place is de-risking the private sector. And that means doing everything from co-investing. We've just put $300 million, for example, into Indorama, one of the world's biggest chemical companies, to help them think through recycling. It's about specific risk reduction. We're doing this in places like ASEAN and East Asia, or through South Asia, where we're helping harmonize, particularly on plastics trade rules, to make sure that the private sector doesn't race to the lowest price point, but in fact, we raise everybody's business models towards the circular rather than the linear. And finally, it's about credit enhancement and innovation. And we've just launched an innovative 7-year, $100 million plastics pollution bond. That what's interesting about it is that the bond isn't going to be repaid just in cash. It's going to be repaid in plastics credits. And so we think that together, if we can repurpose subsidies, and if we can work in de-risking for the private sector while we're waiting for those regulations to come into place, we'll end up being able to finance the type of green change that ultimately will green the financial sector and make the money flow.
Thank you, Valerie. That's very complete, very comprehensive. And you mentioned also the role of small and medium-sized enterprises, which somehow is key, right? Because we know so much of the informal economy is where the labor market is. And so I want to come to you, Davina, because with the African Development Bank, Africa has such a big youth dividend, so many youth that are looking for jobs for the future. And so you've heard a little bit from the 3 different ministers speaking. I'm just wondering, for the African Development Bank, picking up on this piece of the small and medium-sized enterprises, how do you reach them?
Well, thanks, Valerie, and very good to meet you. And since I'm speaking after an African lady minister from Environment and Finance, I'll be very careful to what I say. But just to say that what she said about the need, about the opportunity is right there. She had very clear examples on what they've done, what they've tested. And just to respond to the 3 areas that you've highlighted, infrastructure, regulation, SMEs, my question was on the SMEs. We know that that is very critical. And in fact, our traditional mode of operating did not consider this. But looking at the continent where we operate, the jobs are in the informal sector, especially in the circular space. And so a bit on the ACEA story. How did we get involved as the African Development Bank in the Africa Circular Economy Alliance? 2019, Finland was hosting the World Circular Economy Forum, and they're very concerned that Africa, and the global south generally, was not on the table. They reached out to us, they are our shareholder, and we were like, circular economy, I don't know, we do waste management, but circular economy, that's new. That is 3-4 years ago. Before COVID, we didn't know what circular economy was. We had read about it. We knew it was equal to waste management. No. And fast forward, it was a Google search to find that Rwanda, Nigeria, and South Africa had created an Africa Circular Economy Alliance. But you had to Google it. It was not anywhere. And very fast forward, we reached out. And we were very glad that the Rwandan Minister of Environment led a delegation to Helsinki representing Africa in 2019. What did that create? It created the same 2019, the Africa Ministerial Environment as AMSEN conference in Durban had a resolution on ACEA calling all member countries to join ACEA, saw the opportunity. By 2020, is it 1 or 2? Rwanda was hosting the World Circular Economy Forum. The bank had a Africa Circular Economy Facility. So the energy behind that, and knowing that we needed to see that opportunity, because when you read, circular economy has a 4.5 billion business opportunity. And how do we turn that to the SME level? What we did in that facility was two things of the things that you talked about. We needed to see policies because we couldn't define what circular economy is at a country level. Well, Rwanda has a roadmap. Thank you very much. So what we are trying to do is to have other countries in the alliance design nationally led roadmaps. So this year we are supporting 5 countries: Benin, Chad, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Uganda, design their circular economy roadmaps. This year we are also having an incubation of SMEs on circular practices. In Rwanda, these are hubs in Rwanda, in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So we launched the Uganda roadmap, the initiation phase in January. While there, we reached out to the Development Bank of Uganda. They've done well. They're part of the Africa Association of Development Banks. They are creating a subgroup on climate change. They have a pipeline of climate projects. But this whole circular space, they have a list of what could be circular economy investments, but they are not tagging it as that. Why? Because we don't have metrics. And so the whole conversation about the global circularity protocol is very timely. We are part of the advisory group representing ACEA in that, because the African voice has to be part of. And it's very, very important that we have metrics that speak to the market that we serve. And so as the collective here, we also have the FI group on working group on circularity. I think my colleagues will speak about that. Ideally, because we already work as collective, when we share experiences in a comfort space, because basically that's what ACEA does. Share experiences with the Latin America region in that safe space, because we face the same challenges. And so, yes, the SMEs are a big business for us as the African Development Bank. We have Enable Youth in the agriculture space. We have the SME Bank that was announced last year, that we're working with the EBRD and the other partners that will join, because there's a dividend at the bottom of the pyramid on our demographics. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So it's really interesting. You talk about the bottom of the pyramid, and that's where there's a huge amount of transactions, but the transactions are potentially small. And some of our financial entities have difficulty reaching that space, which is why maybe it remains sort of a very difficult space to move into, and yet one that's so vital for circular economy, for the real economy. So, Nicole, I want to come to you. Perhaps you could also say a few words about the European Investment Bank. I'm not assuming that everyone is ignorant as I am, but I thought you only did business in Europe for a very long time. So maybe you could say a few words about that. And then you could also say a few words about when you listen to ministers speaking about some of their plans, their future, how does the European Investment Bank respond to that?
Thanks, Steve, for a very interesting question. I'm sorry, I'm distracted by a spider that I'm trying to understand whether it's lethal or not. So, but anyway, I don't worry for the time being. No, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really glad that the European Investment Bank has been invited to this important event, and I'm glad to represent it. I mean, you said right, the European Investment Bank is probably by some measures the largest international financial institution. We are lending just below $100 billion a year. I mean, in euro, but in euros mostly, but that's quite sizable. And but we are not doing it only in Europe. So we're doing it for 90% or a bit less than that within the European Union, but we have an ambition to be as global as the World Bank. Sorry, we have a bit of competition here. And exactly, no, that's the way we should say it. And we are really keen that that our support to the circular economy is not limited to the EU. The EU is leading, I would say, worldwide the efforts to a transformation towards a circular economy. This is because of a long-term set of policies, and we have invested over the last 5 years at least €1 billion a year globally, but largely in the EU. We have provided technical and financial assistance, but although this seems non-negligible, it is only 1% of our lending. So it gives you an idea of the investment gap. We spoke before about investment gaps. The investment gaps here are huge. What I would like to bring, if you allow me, is some lessons from our experience, if it can be helpful for everybody else. I'm going to repeat some of the things that have been said before, but maybe I can leverage exactly on those. From Davina said, some years ago, we didn't even know what circular economy was. Some other, the Minister Benali said we need a taxonomy. Yes, the first lesson we learned in our experience is that although it seems obvious, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a set of shared definitions and indicators to navigate this complex field and also to measure our impact. This is necessary, and for this we have set an informal, let me call it like this, working group among the NDBs, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, EBRD, Asian Development Bank. Am I missing? Inter-American, sorry, you're right, absolutely, Inter-American Development Bank. And we are working regularly on this, trying to develop this set of our taxonomy, consistent, of course, with more already existing taxonomies, but in a way that is applicable to the businesses and can help circular economy to move forward in a very constructive way. Now, the second lesson we have learned, and we invested in quite a few projects, our experience comes both from the public and the private sector. Public sectors, we have made a lot of operations in cities. Cities are the cradle, the catalyst for circular economy, but we have also invested in industry, in several industries, to help them shift toward circularity. I'm talking about packaging, electronics and batteries. We have invested in water reuse. This is a very important aspect of circularity, and this is just to name a few. Sorry, I needed to get rid of that spider. So based on this is my second remark, is we have learned to improve our assessment on the viability of business models. And not all the business models, not all the circular economy business model are viable. There might be problems in access to capital, uncertainty of returns. Valerie mentioned the risking. This is absolutely relevant. And let's not forget the complexity and the coordination of the value chain. The moment we do a small investment in a part of the value chain, well, everything else has to be rethought. So this is non-negligible. And second, it's true, we need to go through the SMEs to the small businesses, but if we want to have an impact, we need to be able to aggregate all of those and to scale up our financing. Crowding in the private sector, but scaling up our financing. And the third last lesson, then I let you move on, is we as public banks, we are tackling market failures, we are tackling investment barriers. But so we will definitely do it, but we cannot do this in isolation. We need to operate, and all the circular economy actors need to operate in a clear, predictable, supportive regulatory environment. We spoke about subsidies, incentives. We need also to have clear international standards. So we already follow a quite advanced EU strategy. The Circular Economy Action Plan was mentioned, the Green Deal, but we would really welcome, for instance, a UN plastic treaty that could represent a huge step towards addressing these international legislative gaps. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much. So that was fascinating, both on the sort of the genealogy of European Investment Bank, but also your vision and your experience in working with circular economy initiatives, because there's a lot to learn from there. What I'm hearing is it's complex, it's challenging, but it's doable. And so it goes back a little bit to what Minister Vogel was saying. It's really not, there is no option but to make it to that point that you're all aspiring to. You also mentioned the private sector. And so our last speaker tonight on this panel is Liesel van Ast. She's with the Unit Finance Initiative, which pulls together those companies in the financial sector which are aiming high with their portfolios. So Liesel, just a few words, and I'm going to beg your indulgence. I know we're close to time and it's been a very long day. We're going to have, after Liesel, closing remarks from the Executive Secretary of UNECE, who's been with us. And if there are any burning questions from the ministers, I'm also going to let you ask a question if you really want to this panel. So Liesel, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that the development finance institutions play a critical role in helping to mobilize commercial banks to finance circular economy projects. And this is important because financial assets globally are over 400 trillion. So this really needs to move into the mainstream to really shift more, move from the niche and from theory into practice. But in order to do that, the financial institutions really need data. They need the indicators, criteria, metrics, which have already been mentioned. And so disclosure requirements and sustainable finance taxonomies that are harmonized across jurisdictions to also enable capital flows across borders. So, for example, UNEP has supported the development of a framework in Latin America, Caribbean on taxonomies. And we did a study on sustainable finance for circular economy in Latin America. And we really found that 7 countries were integrating circular economy into their development plans, into their climate and environment strategies. And this has made a real difference in then enabling the finance to flow also from public and private sector into circular economy models. So we're seeing debt, equity, and blended and a whole range of instruments moving into circular economy transition. So this really does work in practice, and we've seen evidence of it in Europe, in Latin America, and also to some extent in Africa. We have a study coming out in April on what's happening in Africa on circular economy financing. But really, financial institutions need to have the common indicators, metrics, standards, frameworks, and also collaboration between public-private finance, the regulatory frameworks, the tools, the knowledge sharing, and really international exchange in order to help accelerate this space.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Liesel. So again, taxonomy, metrics, sort of navigating and marking the way forward. So I'm going to look at the 2 ministers from Peru and Rwanda. Is there any question that's burning inside of you that you would like to pose to this panel before we let them go? No? Okay, so you're off the hook for tonight. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. We have 2 final speakers. Thank you so much. So let me invite to the stage Madame Tatiana Bolsion. She is the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, please. And I would also like to invite to the stage Ms. Claudine Ueda. She is our minister from Rwanda, who will provide the closing remarks. Tatiana, you've heard a lot. It's been a very long day as well. I know for you because you're traveling today. But just in terms of take home, you know, as somebody who's in charge of a very important, a very large and important UN organization, which, as I mentioned earlier, has done a lot of work on circular economy, the metrics, the indicators, something that we heard about. Your take homes from tonight.
Takeaways. Well, that's a challenge. I mean, after such an interesting panel and so many comments, I would like to resume a few from the first panel. One thing, commitment. And I think you were the one talking a lot about commitment of the government, and that is the key. First, if we want to achieve something, we have to have commitment, first of all, from the government. Second, the importance of the financial institution. That was unanimous across the room that it is important. First panel, and it was confirmed in the second one, that leveraging and filling in the financial gaps cannot happen unless we have a partnership with financial institutions. Then we talked about alliances, how important they are. But alliances cannot exist by themselves. Only relying on alliances is not making things happening. And this is why I particularly like, because we at UNICE believe a lot in regulations and platforms. So the references to the need of international regulations, clear regulations, institutional capacity, building up institutional capacities, and the involvement of the private sector. So we talked about financial institutions, but really private sector involvement and the focus on SMEs. So for me, these are the takeaways. And the interesting part is that I do believe that we at UNICE, one of the regional economic commissions, I believe that we already have addressed this, because circular economy, it's interesting. You're right. I mean, a couple of years ago, that was not the topic that we were discussing. But 2 years ago, for example, our commission has put circular economy as its key topic for the activity of the region. Because before that, it was more chaotic. Yes, we address environment. Yes, we address transport, energy, critical raw materials, but it wasn't exactly in this circular way. So this is why we have created platforms, and you've mentioned at the beginning, we have this UNICE stakeholder engagement platforms, Circular Step, and it brings together as a platform for dialogue, but also in development of standards, regulations, and guidelines, best practices. And it has governmental bodies, financial institutions, but also business, civil society, to catalyze this action towards circular economy. And one interesting outcome of that, I mean, we have a study on mobilizing financing for circular economy, and it focuses exactly on the initiatives and their impact. It provides recommendations how low and middle income countries in particular can overcome some of the barriers in mobilizing financing. And we had a very interesting example from one of the Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan. This is one of the first countries in Central Asian region that issued a SDG, a sovereign bond. Our colleague from EIB was fighting with the spider. We are fighting with the bus. So please bear with me. So Uzbekistan really has a very interesting experience on how exactly to integrate and implement strategies and reforms to bring in this circularity. And the huge focus was on also integrating SDGs in their policies. We also have been working with a lot of countries, and again, both with public sector, private sector, in building these public-private partnerships. We even have a very interesting instrument. It's called PEERS. It's an instrument to assess public-private partnership infrastructure project against the Sustainable Development Goals. So if a project is sustainable or not. I think this is one of the most brilliant inventions that we at UNICE have done. It's been applied widely. And the biggest advantage is it does not focus only on large infrastructure projects. So smaller ones, because sometimes this is a challenge. We only look at bigger image, bigger pictures. So these are a few elements that you see, we already, based on some of the comments that the speakers have mentioned, we already realized through the work on this platform. So alliances are important, we can confirm. Making regulations and recommendations and guidelines is again very important. And overall, I think we are moving into the right direction. Listening to the discussion now. Now, I noticed by the room that there is a need for more regulation in one field, and that is plastic. And I took good notice of that. But otherwise, I think we have a good understanding where we are. It's just now that we have to continue on these efforts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, Madam Executive Director of UNEC. We are struggling, isn't it? I was almost tempted to say negotiations are really reaching a critical stage, but I'm sure it's something else. Colleagues, we've reached the end of a really, really interesting evening, and we've heard from 4 5 governments about what they are doing on circular economy. We've heard from a major UN organization which is supporting the circular economy progress. We've heard from, in some ways, representatives from the Africa Circular Economy Alliance, the Coalition for Circular Economy in Latin America. And to close today, on behalf of the 4 co-hosts of this event, Rwanda, Morocco, Peru, Costa Rica, I would like to hand over to you, Madame Claudine Ueda.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, again, for just giving me this opportunity for the closing remarks. Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Yes, I'm very honored and delighted to deliver the concluding remarks for this side event. I tried to just to capture what was said before, but this was already said by my colleague here. And this side event that was about leveraging effective and inclusive collaboration with financial institutions to accelerate transition to more circular economy. As it was said in those sessions, unlocking finance is key to support the development, implementation, and the monitoring of circular policies, as well as accompany business in transitioning to more circular business. Achieving this circular economy, as a way highlighted, is challenging yet essential, and every stakeholder is key to the solution. Some key takeaway from representative from financial institutions, we've heard that subsidies reforms are needed. We've heard that de-risking the private sector is really key. Greening the financial sector is really very, very important. And we understood the green taxonomy. I mean, the importance of having this green taxonomy if you want to transition to this circular economy. And again, we've heard the importance of integrating the SMEs towards transition into this circular economy. I can say that to succeed, partnership and the collaboration between public and the private institutions are worth considering to develop on all-encompassing financial mechanism to fund the circular economy. And again, we've heard those platforms such as Africa Circular Economy Alliance and the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, with experience in sharing best practices and lessons learned in the process of promoting circular economy, have been seen as the key players in transitioning to circular economy. And I would like to mention at the end that an ambitious global plastic treaty will foster a vibrant circular economy, and let's work together to make it a reality. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before ending my closing remark, I would like to express my appreciation to all the colleagues and speakers and panelists for the great and the significant contribution to this session. And also my greatest, deepest gratitude goes to all who attend this side event and help to make it a successful one. And my deepest gratitude again to all who took part in organizing the side event and to have made it more vibrant. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
We have braved spiders, we have braved the noise, and now we are free for a gala dinner. Thank you so much, Excellencies.